Do citizens have the right to know who is funding political parties and their electoral campaigns? The Indian government's attorney says they do not. The Attorney General has told India's top court that citizens do not possess the right to know about the sources of political funding. The court is hearing petitions challenging the validity of the electoral bond scheme. Introduced in 2018, the scheme aims to provide an alternative to cash donations to political parties. The government hopes that it will enhance transparency in political funding. Under the scheme, electoral bonds can be purchased by Indian citizens and firms. Only registered political parties that secure at least 1% of the votes polled in the last state or national elections are eligible to receive these funds through electoral bonds. The government says that this will maintain donor anonymity and shield them from any fear or favor. It also says that the bonds will help channel clean money in politics, but critics argue that anonymous funding through electoral bonds encourages corruption, and the debate is now in the court. With that said, let's just take a look at the electoral funding mechanism in other parts of the world. Let's start off with the United States. The federal law requires the disclosure of any and all contributions over $200. And this, by the way, includes donors' names, addresses, occupations, and employer information. And this information is then made a public record. And in France as well, the law on financial transparency requires transparency in political life, requires the political parties to provide reports in relation to election campaigns, and they must reveal the identity of the donors in these records, which have to be made public. There are sanctions for parties breaching the provisions of the law in the form of fines, the loss of public funding, deregistration of the party, and even imprisonment. Let's take a look at how things work out in the UK. Under the existing transparency regime, political parties are responsible for checking the source of donations and are required to return the donations if they are uncertain about the identity of the donor or the lender. Across the Atlantic, in Canada, all candidates and political parties are required to submit reports of their contributions and expenses to the Chief Electoral Officer. The disclosure has been an aspect of election financing provisions since 1874. And just to take a closer look at the many questions around political funding, it has been dominating headlines today in India. Let's just get in our special guest on the broadcast, Dilip Cherian. Thanks very much for being here. Let me begin by asking you for your reaction to what the centre has said regarding the right of the citizens to know about the source of political funding.
To my mind, I think the defense of the centre is rather a form of trampling on citizens' rights. I think in a democracy, citizens have the right to know who is funding and who is being funded. We cannot have a situation where there is a lack of transparency on either the source of funds or the final recipient. Both of those will definitely make a difference to voter behavior. Therefore, it is necessary to disclose that as a party, as individual, and since these donations go to parties, the parties need to declare that, in my view.
Right. Let's just also talk about the issue of political funding. To what extent do you think it actually affects the decision of the voters as far as transparency of political funding is concerned?
To my mind, the voters' position is determined by at least the basic fundamental parameters. Has it been donated by a particular business house? Is it a bunch of individuals? Is it a corporation? Is it an Indian corporation? Or is it a corporation which has global links? Suppose the government were to say that look, to allow people to donate to parties without their names being disclosed, I think that is all right. But who is the, what kind of company, what kind of corporation, and what kind of entity, or is it an individual? I think that's important to have visible at this stage. We can go on to the next stage, but at this stage, this is primary.
All right, it's interesting that you mentioned that, but hold that thought. Let me also tell our viewers about a very interesting development, a related development. India's main opposition party, the Indian National Congress, is expected to, as per reports, start a nationwide crowdfunding campaign. And reports say the party will launch the campaign after the assembly elections in the 5 states next month. This is for the 2024 elections. How do you see this strategy going forward, and what do you make of the Congress's move to actually resort to crowdfunding in India?
You know, crowdfunding has a long history, and I think that it is a very democratic means of raising money. The most recent and in scale example of it was how Obama funded his campaign. But in most countries, especially countries like India, crowdfunding will require a lot of hands, feet, and dongles and phones on the line. So I think that it's pretty hard. And as is well known in India, it is largely traders, businessmen, and big business which do a lot of the funding.
Dilip Cherian, thanks very much for being here on the broadcast and sharing those perspectives. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the updates on the move.